Hi, it's Lauren and welcome back to the Whimsy Stamps channel. I am so excited to share with you this Slimline shaker card I made using the new Lucky Ducky stamp set. I've die cut out my frame using the new Meadow Slimline die as well as these little clouds, and I'm also using the Scallop Peekaboo Slimline die for my background. I am going to be using some distress oxides and creating my background. Now I want to mask off where my blue sky is on my scallop paper, so I'm lining up that negative piece and I'm using some low tack tape to just create a border so I know where my blue needs to stop when I'm distressing. I'm using tumbled glass and I'm going to color in all of that sky so it will layer behind my frame meadow piece, and I'm going to activate some of that oxide by using my spritzer and also splatter on some blue metallic paint. I'm going to lift up my tape here, and I really like how it turned out, so I'm going to set that aside to dry. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the top of my frame here, but I want to block off the bushes, so I'm using that same tape and I'm hiding the bushes, and then I'm also going to create my own bush shape using my tape, so that way I have a nice line between my sky and my grass, and I'm not going to worry about running the blue into the green in spots I don't want. I'm going to distress the top of that frame, spritz it again like I did my scallop paper, and to be consistent with my background piece, I'm going to splatter on more of that blue metallic paint. Once I'm happy with how it looks, I'm going to set it aside to dry and work on the next piece of my card. Before I continue on with the bottom of my frame, I wanted to let it dry, so I'm going to stamp out my images for my card. I'm stamping the cute little duck in a bucket and the 3 button flowers. I'm stamping it in a VersaFine ink, so I am going to be embossing. I made sure to use my embossing buddy before stamping, and once I have a good impression, I will take it out of my MISTI and I will apply some Detail Clear embossing powder. I'm going to use my heat gun to warm up my paper and melt all of that embossing powder, and I'm going to set that aside to let it cool and check on my frame. Now that the blue of my sky is dry, I'm going to peel up all of that tape and I'm going to reverse my masking. So now I'm creating masks for the blue part so I can distress in green. I'm starting off with Mowed Lawn and I'm going to distress all along the bottom of my meadow frame here, applying tape as needed to make sure I don't get green all over the blue. There were a couple spots, but I'm going to hide it later. So I'm going to keep going around with that Mowed Lawn until I'm happy. And then I wanted to add some Rustic Wilderness to darken up and create some shadow and depth to the different die cut pieces here. I love that there are little lines for the bushes and the pretty meadow scene. So I used a piece of scrap paper just to create a mask and colored in some darker color green of that Rustic Wilderness to create that depth. Now I'm covering up all the blue with that same low tack tape and I'm splattering on some green metallic paint onto my meadow. I'm going to peel off my tape and set it aside to dry. So now back to my images. I'm going to be using my Zig Clean Color watercolor brushes and I'm applying watercolor ink to the edges of my image and then using a water brush pen to bring that color into the center. That way I can create some depth in my images as the darker watercolor paint is on the edges and it lightens up as I bring that color towards the center. In order to keep this video not terribly long, I'm going to skip through the coloring. I'm using some yellow for the inside of my flowers. I'm coloring the roses in the bucket, kind of a berry color. It's not quite red, not quite pink. And then I'm going to color all of my leaves with this lighter green. I'm going to bring in some light lavender purple to color in those flowers. I'm adding ink and blending it out with my water brush. And then I'm going to color in the duck this kind of brown, kind of a yellowy brown color. I thought a little brown duck would be really cute sitting in this bucket. And I'm just following the same technique of applying watercolor ink to the darker parts and blending it out with my water brush pen to create shadow and depth. For the flowers on the ground, I went with a pink, again putting color in and blending it out with my water brush pen. And then for the handle, because it is a metal bucket, I thought a little nice, pretty wooden handle would be nice. So I added different shades of brown and used my watercolor pen to blend it all together. And it was a little dark, so I used my microfiber cloth just to pick up that water, and it lightened it right up. For the beak, I used some orange watercolors, and for the grass, I am using that light green again, and as well as a dark green, and then blending it together with my watercolor brush pen. I am blending out the green outside of the image just to make the grass seem fuller. I wanted to add some color to his eyes, so I very carefully outlined the little black iris part of his eye with a teal, and then outlined the outside of the eye with a very light gray. Just wanted to create some color and depth in his eyes. For the button flowers, I'm going to be coloring the stem and the leaves the same way as I colored in my grass. And for the button centers, I'm using yellow and orange and blending those together with my water brush pen. I'm going to color one of the flowers with that same purple as I did for the flowers in the bucket. The other one I'm coloring the pink, the same pink that I colored the flower sitting on the grass. And for the final flower, I'm going to bring back that berry color and color in this final flower, applying color to the center of the petals and coloring it out with my water brush pen. I'm going to set that aside to dry and go back to work on my slimline card. Using that negative piece from the frame, I cut out 2 pieces of acetate to create my shaker. I'm applying a strong adhesive all the way around the frame and applying the first acetate paper down. I am using a foam adhesive roll to create a frame around that acetate where my shaker parts are going to be, and then I'm going to apply foam tape to the rest of my slimline. I didn't want to cover any of the die cut grassy bushes, because I wasn't really sure how I was going to layer all of my images on the front. So now that my foam tape is in place, I'm just picking lots of random sequins and beads for my stash and these really pretty clouds. I will have everything linked down below that is similar. I just shopped my stash for my shaker bits inside here. And once I'm happy with everything in there, I'm going to pull up the release tape just around the shaker and apply that second layer of acetate. This will just help me keep everything inside when I apply this to my scallop piece. I put some more adhesive on the areas that were covered up by the foam tape and then pulled up the rest of the release paper for all of that foam tape, and I'm applying it to my scalloped piece here. I'm checking my shaker, making sure everything is moving. I did notice that my blue beads were a little bit big for my foam layer, so that a few of them do get stuck, but that's okay. I've cut some craft paper for my card base. I've cut it down to 8.5 by 7 and scored it at 3.5 to create an 8.5 by 3.5 side folding card. I glued that down with some wet glue, and now that my images are dry, I fussy cut them out and I'm going to play around with my layout. I wasn't sure where exactly everything was going to go. I know for the depth perception the flowers should be in front because they're so large compared to the duck, but I just didn't really like the layout. So I'm going to flip those flowers and duck so that the flowers are behind them. So they are gigantic flowers, but that's okay. It's cuter this way to me, and it's fine if they're huge compared to the duck. I layered on those clouds as well, making sure to hide any of my accidental green marks on the frame, and I'm going to start gluing everything down. I'm using some wet glue to apply those clouds down, and then I'm going to use a combination of wet glue and some thin foam adhesives behind my flowers. I didn't like that there was too much white between the flower and the leaves, so I'm just using my little paper snips and I'm just going to cut those down. And like I said, I am layering a piece of foam adhesive, a little foam square behind the flower, and applying wet glue to behind the leaves, so it looks like the flowers are kind of rising up out of that die cut grassy line there. And once those are done, I'm going to apply a bunch of those little foam adhesives behind my duck. And before I put him down, I want to make sure I have room for my sentiment. So I'm just throwing on my clear stamps and I'm happy with it. So I go ahead and secure him down. I die cut 2 strips from the Quick Strips die set, my favorite die set for sentiments. And I am stamping in that same VersaFine ink Hope Your Day Is on one of the banners and Just Ducky on the other one. And I'm making sure they're centered to each other, so when I layer them onto the card, the sentiments look centered. And I'm going to go ahead and glue Hope Your Day Is in the sky and Just Ducky underneath the duck in the bucket. I'm going to use my paper snips to trim down those edges. Of course, I should have probably done this before I glued it to the card base, but that's okay. I'm going to get in there with those tiny little scissors and trim it down so that it is flush with the Meadow Slimline frame die. And here is the card. I love it so much. My big giant flowers, my fun shaker elements, and that cute little duck. Here is a final look at the card. I hope you enjoyed this video. You can find everything I use down below in the description. I hope you'll also join Whimsy Stamps over on their Pinterest, Facebook, and Instagram. I have all the links down below. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.